We appear to be in the end game in terms of the Sidney Crosby contract negotiations based on some comments Crosby made earlier this week, and Pat and I are going to discuss those comments right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at SunderForWet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So today, I'm doing something I really never do on the show. I'm hosting the show without a hat on just because I finally trimmed my mop. It looks a lot more cleaner, more professional, to be honest. The mop will return in a few months, honestly, but I felt like I wanted to show it off at least a little bit to the people that watch on YouTube for today's episode. But
it's some good flow, man. You're looking real good. Like, shout out to your hairdresser because they crushed it.
Yeah, he did a great job. Every time I go and get my hair trimmed by him, he always does a tremendous job. So I'm really happy with the way this one came out. But getting to the meat of today's episode, Sidney Crosby spoke to the media during the NHL Media Tour earlier this week. And of course, he was asked about his contract situation just because that's the biggest story in Penguin land right now. And he was asked, number one, is there a chance he could play out the 24-25 season without a new contract? He said no. That answer right there should calm everyone down. He wants to get this deal done before the season. He also added, I'm pretty optimistic it's going to get done. I don't know what day. It's been very positive. I have not had a real difficult process with the Penguins. I, again, am optimistic that something will get done. So also, Pat, that sounds nothing like the Steven Stamkos situation in which we just saw in Tampa Bay, where, remember, he felt disrespected by Tampa Bay's front office heading into the season, especially during the season as well. And then after the season, kind of felt the same way. He was kind of hurt by the way things ended in Tampa Bay, and obviously he's no longer there. That is not happening here with Crosby and the Penguins. It's been widely reported, especially by Elliot Friedman, that the Penguins have made Crosby multiple offers over the offseason. He himself again said that it's been pretty positive overall throughout the summer. I think personally what this means is that he's kind of figuring out which offer he wants to take because he wants to see how long he's going to play for. Do I want to play for maybe 3 to 4 more seasons? I'll take a 3 to 4 year deal. Do I want to play for 5 more seasons? I'll maybe take a 5-year deal if the Penguins are offering me that. So I think it's just him weighing his options, seeing how long he wants to play for at this point before taking that offer with the Penguins. Not surprised there's really been no hiccups in these talks, considering how much Crosby means to the Penguins and how much, the team knows how valuable he is overall. So when you read that quote, Pat, did your nerves kind of calm a little bit? Because I know a lot of people's nerves definitely calmed down a bit after reading that.
For sure. And again, I'll apologize to our listeners here because I think I said this a couple episodes ago. It might even have been about the Crosby stuff, but so much has been going on lately that I'm losing track of time. But this will be a little bit of a scattered shot of thoughts here. But the thing that stood out to me is something he said that really furthers what I think Elliot Friedman said last week, to where he also got asked, and you brought it up a little bit there, of how long he's going to play. So I really do think that furthers Friedman's reporting, because he said, you don't really know the trajectory of everything, how you're going to feel mentally and physically. All you can do each year is evaluate it and go from there. And when you get to this point, you understand it's more of a reality with every year that you play, and you kind of check in with that through the year, every year, and evaluate it. So that to me says Friedman did hear the right things, of where there's probably multi-year offers on the table for Sid, just because he's, got to weigh how much longer does he want to play? Does he want to play, like you said, 3 more years, 4 more years, 5 more years? We don't know. And then I also think of it this way too. You look at Sidney Crosby's career, not just on ice, not just everything he's achieved. You look at everything he's done sponsorship wise in Canada, the contracts he's had here in Pittsburgh. He's made more than enough money. This isn't going to be a contentious negotiation And yeah, Pat Brisson as an agent is going to want to get his clients as much money as possible. But when you have a client like Sidney Crosby, that guy has generational wealth at this point. He's not thinking, oh, if I don't cash out on this next contract, then I could be in trouble in 10, 15 years. This guy is going to have more money than he knows what to do with. So at the end of the day, while yes, we still obviously have to allow for a reality where one day he could not be a Pittsburgh Penguin and play for somebody else, at this point, that reality feels like it would have to be an extreme circumstance to where this team bottoms out so poorly and so badly that he goes, hey, listen, I love Pittsburgh. I love the Penguins, but I still got a few years left in the tank, and this is just bleak. So send me off wherever, get the biggest trade package you can get, and I'll sign a 1 year, 1 day, whatever contract and ride off into the sunset.
I hear you on that, but hey, how about we go ask the SDPN podcast and TSN and all these guys about where Crosby's going to go at the trade deadline this year, right?
Because I mean, we can't be, as much as that does annoy me, we can't be too big hypocrites on that, because we know what it's like this time of year when it comes to hockey, where we're looking for anything to talk about. And when one of the biggest stars in the game still doesn't have a contract extension in place, you kind of got to talk about it.
You got to talk about it, but the way I think some of the Canadian media has talked about it is just a bit too far. Like just bringing up all these destinations and all this stuff, when every time Crosby has spoken to the media about this, he said he wants to retire a member of the Penguins. It's just, I don't know. It kind of grinds my gears a little bit overall. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons why I can't wait for this to be over, is so that this shuts up a lot of the Canadian media overall. But I think money-wise for this contract with Crosby, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think he's going to get 10 million plus on this deal. I think it's actually going to be right around 10 million. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 10.5 million per year on, 3 to 4 years. I don't think it's going to be Leon Draisaitl money. I don't think it's going to be Austin Matthews money. I don't think it's going to be what Connor McDavid is going to get on his next deal, and he's going to break the bank as well in a couple of years. But I do think it's going to be, 3 times 10, 3 times 10.5. And I think that's fair, considering how he's been below market value throughout his entire career. I mean, this final year of his deal is the last one of that crazy 12-year contract that he signed before the new CBA came into being. And he was only making 8.7 million per year. Obviously, the number, superstitious, all that stuff, but he is more than deserving of making 10 million per year on this deal. And I do think once this deal gets announced, whether it's the end of this week or next week before camp or just any time before the season, I do think it's going to be 10.5 million per year.
I agree with you, sort of. And I'm not breaking any new ground here when I say this. This is not some deeply philosophical take here, but for me, it depends upon the length of the contract. If it's 2 to 3 years, yeah, I'm right there with you. He's probably going to make in the neighborhood of 10 million. If it's 4 to 5, I could see it staying in that 8.5, 9.5 range, just because, like I said, even though this guy is set financially forever, there's still, you think about the way that Mario Lemieux was talked about when he came out of retirement. I know, big difference, owner of a team, all that stuff. But, they basically said when he decided to come out of retirement, you're one of the best players to have ever played. You're on your own going to be a draw for tickets and fans to come watch. So you should be properly compensated. So I do think if it's shorter term, 2 to 3 years, yeah, we're talking maybe 10 million, 4 to 5. I think it could stay right in line with what he's got now, just because essentially you're going to get to the same place total in the contract. But if it's spread out, you can maybe talk him into, hey, take a little bit off the top of this. We'll have some room with a rising cap. We can maybe get some more people in here. But if it's 2 to 3 years, I'm definitely thinking 10 million.
Yeah, I could see the longer the term, the lower the AAV being. I also could see them doing quite a few maybe signing bonuses in that contract overall too. So I'm curious to see what it is going to look like once it gets officially announced. Again, whether it's...
And now we know, thanks to Carolina,
yeah,
apparently you can have sliding scales again. So, hey, maybe they do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you also see some contracts in baseball, especially, I root for the Washington Nationals way back when they were doing a lot of, deferred contracts where players were getting the money like well after the contract is done. I don't think you're going to see that here with Crosby. I think it's, again, short term, it's going to be bigger money. As you said, maybe longer term, the AAV goes down a little bit, but I could see them, again, giving quite a few signing bonuses in that deal overall, which is why I'm excited to see what it looks like once it gets officially announced. But I think that will do it for this opening segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to get into a report from David Pagnotta and how the Penguins are going to open up contract talks with Marcus Pettersson once this Crosby extension gets finalized. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's Game Time Picks. Creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. There's also seat views. Get a full view from your seat in the app before you buy. They have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, David Pagnotta added a bit to the Sidney Crosby stuff that we've been seeing throughout the week here, and he did say Crosby is the obvious priority for the Penguins, but after his new contract is done, the Penguins will begin talks with Marcus Pettersson on an extension as well. Pagnotta, let's just say he's kind of hit or miss at times. He got the return wrong with the Carolina trade. He thought Scott Morrow was in the trade with the Jake Guentzel one. That did not end up happening. I still think, again, the return for Guentzel was, totally fine. It would have been better if Scott Morrow was in it, considering he's a great prospect. But I still, looking back at it, I think the Penguins, they definitely got what they could for Guentzel, and Bunting was especially awesome after the trade deadline. But again, Pagnotta, a bit hit or miss overall. As for this situation with Marcus Pettersson, this is going to really fascinate me. We've had this discussion a little bit at times on the show. I don't think we've had it in quite a few months at this point, so I think it's good to revisit it now. He is also going into the final year of his contract. He's going to be getting a pretty big payday by someone once this is done, whether it's the Penguins or another team, considering how good he is in the NHL. I also think he's one of the more underrated defensemen overall in the NHL, especially with what he can do in his own zone. And I said it on Twitter. I'll say it here. I love what Pettersson brings to the team. I think he brings an element that not really any of these other defensemen have, and that's just very steady play in his own end. I get scared thinking about what this defensive group would look like without him there, considering how great he is in his own zone. But that said, I think this situation, they're going to have to maybe punt this to maybe around the trade deadline during the season. I don't think it's smart business to extend him before the season, considering where you are heading into the season. I think overall, if you want to kind of slow play this during the year, that's totally fine. Say maybe you get to the trade deadline, the team is still in the race. I can see a world where they keep him, and I actually do think that makes sense. But if you are out of it like the Penguins were at the time of the Jake Guentzel trade around the trade deadline, because at that point, Pat, we both said it, we felt like they were kind of done. Yes, they did make a really nice late season run. They almost got in, but that late season run just felt like it was never going to happen considering how the team was playing. So if you're in that same situation like they were for Guentzel, I do think it makes sense to move him, and I think they will move him. However, if they're in the race, I think they might keep him, especially if this team is better than expected this year. So I don't think they should make any rash decisions right now. I think if you maybe want to start talks, okay, I understand. But this is a decision that you punt until February or March.
Yeah, this podcast might not be a presidential debate, but I am going to flip-flop a little bit here, because the way I look at this is there's really no wrong answer here. I think all of these outcomes, regardless of, breaking the bank for Marcus Pettersson, which is as valuable as I think he is. He's not worth some crazy contract, but I think both outcomes here are solid. You know, you think about what he brings to the table as such a steady two-way defenseman, what he's like in his own zone. He is a great first pass defenseman, especially in a league that has a lot of emphasis on the transition game. Bringing that to the table is huge for success. But I also look at it this way. Keeping him's fine. If you want to extend him, that's great. He is going to help your team one way or another. But then, like you were saying, you look at where this team is right now and what Kyle Dubas and company are trying to accomplish with this retool on the fly, which even Crosby kind of talked about during media day, where he said, basically, you've seen a lot of teams over the last few years pull this off where they don't completely strip it down to the bone, but they make a lot of savvy moves, and next thing you know, they're right back in the mix. So that could be a possibility. But then you look at it this way. If you're trying to do this retool on the fly, this is probably your most valuable piece to move outside of maybe Lars Eller, because he is on a very affordable, expiring deal. He's the kind of defenseman that you absolutely win with, especially if you're a contending team. So you know that there is going to be a huge market out there for him. So I look at it kind of the same way as you do, in the sense that you don't need to have him extended before this season begins. I think one way to do this is to, and maybe you don't want to communicate this with the player himself, because you almost don't want to say like, hey, we're leaving you in limbo, or we don't believe in this team, because not only is that bad business, that's just bad operation, because you want to believe, hey, our team's going to go out and win unless you're a completely rebuilding team. So I think maybe you start negotiations with him and you figure out, okay, what does he want? What do we want? And if we get into 2025 and we're right in the mix, let's open up these talks again, get them extended, keep them here. But if you start approaching, I believe it's March 7th is the announced date for the trade deadline, and it looks like, hey, we're not in this thing, because we talked about it before we hit record with the Gensel deal. When they dealt Gensel, they weren't on the bubble. They were on the bubble of the bubble. They were very close to dead. We declared this team dead. So if you get to that point, you're in a similar situation, maximize the return. And if he doesn't extend with whoever you trade him to, you got next summer if you want to bring him back.
No, and there's a world where he's potentially going to be the best defenseman available at the trade deadline. And just looking at recent years, contenders will pay out the wazoo for good defensemen at the trade deadline. I mean, for God's sakes, didn't we just see Ben Sherratt get one heck of a return at the trade deadline just a couple of years ago? I'm telling you, man, defensemen get very good returns, especially very good ones at the trade deadline. If this team is out of it, I think you could see a first-round pick coming back, a potential prospect, if not a prospect, maybe a roster player like the Penguins got back for Jake Gensel. I do think Kyle Dubas could do very well in a trade for Pettersson if they go down that route, especially if this team is out of it by March 7th. And that is correct, Pat. That is when the trade deadline is for this season. They kind of did their big dates today, I guess, for the season. I think the latest the Stanley Cup final could be is June 23rd. The playoffs start around mid-April, which is where it should be overall. I'm glad that we're basically just about back to that overall. But just getting back to my original point, I really do think the Penguins could do very well in a return if they go down that path.
They absolutely could. And this is going to sound a little silly and pedantic, but if there is one thing working against Marcus Pettersson's value, he's left-handed.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds silly to say, but if you go back and look at trades and contracts for defensemen, if you're a defenseman that shoots right, teams will back up the Brinks truck for you in free agency, and they will send whatever they got to send to acquire you via a trade. So I do think, like, at the same time, I'm not disagreeing that he has tremendous value. I said it myself. I believe it. But if he was right-handed, my God, they could get like half of a franchise for him if he was right-handed.
And I just wanted to make sure I got that right for the Sherratt trade. Yeah, the Canadians traded him to the Florida Panthers a couple years ago. First-round pick, a fourth-round pick, and they got a prospect. And that's for Ben Sherrod, who at this point is not a very good defenseman at all. But that should show everyone that prices for defensemen at the trade deadline, they'll get pretty steep. And I know Kyle Dubas will set a very high price for him if he is made available at the deadline. But still, this is something that's going to be really intriguing throughout the season. I'm sure they'll have some preliminary discussions with him. As you said, maybe seeing what's he at for his number. What are the Penguins at? If I had to guess what his value is, it's somewhere 5.5 million per year, maybe 6 million per year, or something along those lines. I'm just not sure at this point right now Kyle Dubas wants to go down that road, but he could always surprise me a little bit overall. But I think that'll do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, the boys are back in town. A lot of informal skates are happening up in Cranberry, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, at least to end the show overall. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our last sponsor, and that is Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. One more time, that's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, a lot of the players are back in Pittsburgh. Training camp starts next week. There's a lot of skates happening in Cranberry. Taylor Haas is doing a great job reporting on these skates for DK Pittsburgh Sports. If you're not checking out her work on that website, you are doing it wrong. She is one of the best Penguins reporters in this game, and she's giving a lot of great details about these skates on the Penguins live file. Evgeny Malkin was back at practice today. Sidney Crosby was back today. Jackson Ivany was also back. And she was also reporting that there was a little bit of a scrimmage going on as well between some of the players. I saw some people freaking out that Lars Eller was centering a line with Michael Bunting and Rickard Rakell. People, it's not even training camp yet. The second line during the season is going to be Michael Bunting with Evgeny Malkin and probably Rickard Rakell. Freaking out because Lars Eller is in that spot. You're just complaining for the sake of complaining. Again, I saw a little bit of it on Twitter for some reason. If you're really getting mad about that, I think it's probably time to go outside and touch some grass, in my opinion. You also have a top line of Drew O'Connor with Sidney Crosby and Brian Russ, which we could see quite a bit this season. And then you had some other lines mixed in there as well. Tristan Jarry is also at the skates. Rucker McGroarty is there. Everyone is basically back in Pittsburgh at this point, gearing up for training camp. And I'm giddy, man. I'm excited for training camp at this point. We're a week away. It feels awesome reading Taylor's reports and seeing the guys just goofing off, having fun with one another, just having some cool scrimmages and all that. Again, just reading those reports gets me so excited for the season.
Just everybody take the journey with me real quick. You smell that? Air's getting a little bit crisper. You got to put a jacket on in the morning, maybe run the defroster on your car when you leave for work in the morning. And what's that? What's that you hear in the distance? It's skates digging into freshly Zamboni'd ice. It's players hitting pucks off of the boards. It's goalie pads making that pop. We're right there, people. It's coming. But overall, man, I mean, you're right about Taylor. We got to get her back on the show because she is all over this stuff. She's on top of it, even when everybody else is checked out. So
she's there every day. She does a great job with these skates and just a great job in general with her coverage.
She's just absolutely tremendous. One quick note that we do have to mention, this came from her. It came from just about everybody today. We kind of talked about on Monday, the prospect challenge. There will be a change to the roster. Tanner Howe is not going to be a part of it. He's reported to have a facial injury and they're kind of just calling it day to day. They don't believe it's serious. He's recovering from that. So all the best to him. But I mean, you look at her reporting and just about everybody else's for these informal skates, a lot of the prospects are there too. And there is no better way to get ready for this than to play with a lot of the big boys, because we can have our takes, our beliefs, whatever about where this team is right now, but that's still a damn lot of talent on that ice. And if you're a 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old trying to cut their teeth and make it into the pros, and you're going up against Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Erik Karlsson, Brian Rust, and a few others, and yeah, it's not training camp yet, but those guys are fun to watch. But seeing them up close, you're going to learn it's a bit of a different game now.
Those scrimmages just, I think, help those prospects become better players as well, because you are going up against players better than you, especially players who have been in the NHL for a long time in Crosby, Malkin, Erik Karlsson, Brian Rust, etc. So I think they'll definitely have a lot to take away from those scrimmages. I will say it is unfortunate that Tanner Howell will not be in the Prospects Challenge, and that he's a bit banged up, because I really wanted to see what he can do on the ice against the other team's top prospects, and also see just how much of a rat that he truly is on the ice. I was having a conversation with one of my buddies in my DMs today, and he was telling me as well, like, heck, I really wanted to see what Howell and McGroarty could do together, just because of how much of a pain in the butts they are to play against. So that's just unfortunate that we won't get Tanner Howell, but again, wish him the best in his speedy recovery. But I'm still excited to watch the Prospects Challenge this week, and considering how, for the first time in quite a while, the Penguins have a much better prospect pool here. And I think there's, legitimate future NHL talent to watch this time compared to other years where, again, there really just wasn't much there, especially when, Crosby, Malkin, and Letang were kind of in their heights. Just wasn't much there overall. Now, again, I'm much more excited.
Yeah, it's good to see now that it's actually, and we've said this a million times this summer, it's nice to see that there actually are, again, prospects worth keeping our eyes on, rather than, hey, this one guy, we don't really know about him, but he's shown a little bit of promise. Maybe he'll be something. Now, like, we're looking at a lot of these guys and thinking 2-3 years, these could be roster mainstays in Pittsburgh. They could be guys who turn into legitimate NHL talents. And if there's one thing, and I say this all the time, if there's one thing the Penguins have gotten right in the Crosby Malkin era, it's development. They have been able to develop a lot of players that they get out of college, that they get in the later rounds, that you don't really think of. And then 3-4 years after you find out they signed them, drafted them, whatever, played them in Wilkes-Barre or Wheeling, all of a sudden they're right up there contributing. So you add that with a lot of these guys now have actual good pedigrees from where they came from, and we could see that translate into being full-time contributors at the NHL level.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys won't be available for the next year to probably even 3 to 4 years, but it's still going to be fun watching at least, some of the future this upcoming weekend. We'll have a full preview of that coming up during the Thursday episode of the show. And with that in mind, I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back on Thursday for one more episode this week. And then next week, we're back to dailies, though I will say, Pat will be doing 3 solo episodes next week because I will be out of the country starting on Friday. I'm heading to Aruba with my family to celebrate my uncle's 50th birthday. That's my last quote unquote summer / preseason vacation before, I will be fully locked in for the season. And then I'm not going away basically at all from October until, April, May, June, all that good stuff until next year. But again, one more episode this week, and then we're back to dailies next week. I'll be on for 2 of the episodes next week, but Pat will do 3 solo episodes next week for you all as well. But again, thank you all so much for tuning in for today's episode, and Pat and I will be back on Thursday.